This video will show you how to trim a door to fit in an existing opening. To check the width of the door, I'll take 3 measurements, one at the top, the middle and the bottom. To check the finish height of the door, I'll take a measurement on the right and left of the door opening. To check if the door lining is plumb, I put a 6-foot level on the inside of the door lining, especially important on the hinge side. This door lining isn't plumb on the hinge side, so more trimming will be needed later. When storing the doors correctly, they should be stored flat. I use the same tape measure that I measured the door opening onto the new door blank. When I mark the measurements onto the door blank, I remove up to 3 mm from each side of the door opening. To trim the door, I use a Makita plunge rail saw. I set the rail on the door and turn the hoover on. Once I've plugged the hoover into the saw, this will help reduce dust from cutting. To protect eyes, lungs and ears, wear a dust mask, safety glasses and ear defence. The instructions supplied with this door say to take a maximum of 5 mm off each edge. Once I make the first cut with the rail, I make the second cut, making sure the 2 cuts align. I make sure the blade is sharp and I drop the depth of the blade to just below the needed depth of the door. Once I have made the cut, I lightly sand the door to take off the arris edge. I need to take 1.5 mm off the top of the door, so I'm using an electric planer to take this small amount off. I come in from each corner of the door to not break out the corners. Again, I lightly sand the edge of the door to take off the arris edge. The thickness of the doors is slightly thicker than the original doors, so I have to remove the door stops and set them in the correct positions, otherwise the door will bind and not latch properly. The best way to remove the stops is to use a knife on the inside and outside edges to stop the paint splitting when they're pulled off. I then use a hammer and thin blade to work the stops off, finishing with a small pry bar. Mark the stops and the door lining with a pencil of where they came from. I check for any pins sticking out of the door lining and pull them. It's helpful to put the door in a stand to cut out the hinges. To mark the position of the hinges, I put my tape from the top of the door and mark the top of each hinge. The hinges are usually set at 150 mm from the top of the door, one in the middle, and one at 225 mm from the bottom of the door. For this door, I'm marking up new positions on the door to correspond with the old hinge positions in the door lining. If you're doing the same, you'll want to take away 2 mm from each measurement to allow for a gap at the top of the door. For example, the top of the hinge position in the door lining might be 152 mm, and therefore I mark 150 mm onto the door. Due to the amount of doors I install, I use a hinge jig and a 1/4 inch router for speed and accuracy. I'm just using my hands to clamp the jig onto the door, but you should use the bradawl supplied to fix the jig into position. Once you have cut out the hinge positions with a router, you'll be left with rounded corners. Use a corner chisel to square those off. It's a good idea to pre-drill where your screws are going to get a central position and to assist the screw going in without snapping the screw heads off. As with any pre-drilling, you want to use a drill bit equal or slightly less than the bore of the screw. This allows the thread of the screw to cut into the timber. Once the hinges are installed, I use air pump bags to raise the door to the correct height. This is easier when you're installing the door by yourself. Here, the original hinge positions need more cut out for the new hinges to fit in place. I use a chisel and hammer to slightly tidy up the hinge position. You can then fix the hinges into the door lining using the original holes if lining up correctly, or by pre-drilling where needed. I use the screws supplied to fix the hinges into the door lining. Do the same for the middle and bottom hinges. You can now test the operation of the door to see if any more of the door needs to be trimmed. In this example, the door lining is catching on the door lining header and a little on the bottom of the leading edge. This is due to the hinge side of the door lining being out of plumb. I tape some masking tape under the door and onto the inside of the door lining so I can scribe the door to work out how much extra needs to be trimmed off. To scribe a door, I use a 2 to 3 mm plastic spacer with a pencil to mark the door. I plane the top of the door whilst it's hanging. Although to plane the bottom of the door, I had to remove the door to trim it and then put it back on. Next, watch my how to install a door handle video.